Get out of 2A now. You don't belong up here, and I'll have security remove you if you refuse.
Then remove me. But remember this moment, because you still have no idea whose plane you're standing on.
Get off the plane, you look suspicious, and you reek of it. Owen lowered his book. He was in 2A, he'd paid for it, paid. The supervisor's laugh came slow and cruel. People like you belong in the gutter, not breathing our air. The words hit like a slap across the quiet cabin. I haven't done anything, Owen said. The supervisor didn't answer. He just stared. I just want to go home, Owen said. Then the supervisor said, get off before I throw you out. Now, a child in the back row stared wide-eyed at the front of the plane. The cabin had gone completely still. Please, Owen said. Kids are watching. Good. Let them see. Filth dragged out. He ripped the boarding pass in half. Then he nodded to the officers behind him, and strangers watched a calm man in handcuffs get dragged out of the seat he had paid for. The filth in 2A, in 6 hours he was going to freeze all 180 planes. 90 minutes earlier, none of this had happened yet. Owen Parker moved through the terminal like a man with nowhere to rush. He was 44 years old, broad-shouldered, in a plain grey hoodie and old sneakers, a worn paperback sticking out of his jacket pocket. Nobody looked twice, that was how he preferred it. He stopped at a coffee cart and read the barista's name tag. Long shift. Danny the Kid blinked, surprised anyone had bothered to look. Brutal one, man. Owen smiled and left $10 on a $4 coffee. Hang in there. The smell of burnt espresso and floor cleaner hung in the morning air. Overhead, a gate agent's voice crackled through tired speakers, calling a delayed flight to Denver. Wheels rumbled over tile. A baby cried 2 gates down. It was the Fridays before a holiday weekend, and the terminal was a river of people moving in every direction. Families dragging overstuffed bags, businessmen speed walking with phones glued to their ears, departure boards flickering, half the flights already stamped delayed in angry yellow. Owen had been traveling all weekend. He'd flown out to see his mother for her birthday. Homemade cake with too many candles, her warm hand patting his cheek like he was still 9 years old. She'd slipped a card into his bag at the door. Read it on the plane, she'd said. Now he just wanted his own bed. His phone buzzed. A text from Megan, his assistant. Board decks ready for Monday. No rush. Enjoy your weekend, Mr. Parker. He silenced it and slid it away. Monday could wait. This morning belonged to nobody but him. An old woman struggled with a rolling bag near the escalator, her knuckles white on the handle. Owen crossed over without a word and lifted it onto the step for her. She thanked him twice, flustered. He just nodded and kept walking, already forgetting he'd done it before he was 10 steps away. He never announced himself. He never did. To every face in that terminal, he was just another tired traveler in a hoodie. Not the man whose name sat in quiet gold letters on the tails of the planes parked outside the glass. That was how Owen liked it. 15 years spent building this airline from 3 leased jets to a fleet of 180, and he still flew commercial half the time. Still bought his own coffee. Still learned the names of people who would never learn his. Then he saw it. A few gates down, a young black man in a college sweatshirt stood with his arms half raised. 2 agents digging through his backpack, slow and thorough, pulling out a charger, a notebook, while a steady stream of other passengers strolled past unbothered, unchecked, invisible to the same eyes. Owen stopped walking. He watched the kid's jaw tightened into that familiar, swallowed kind of patience, the kind you learn early, the kind Owen had worn his entire life. A cold weight settled in his chest. He'd seen this 1,000 times. He had been this 1,000 times, but today he was just passing through, so he let it go. The way you learn to let small things go just to get through an ordinary day. He didn't know it yet, but in less than an hour he wouldn't be able to look away. Because it would be him, the boarding call for Flight 226 echoed down the corridor. First class, Group 1, now boarding. Owen pulled out his pass, the paper gone soft from his pocket. He walked toward the gate and sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. Seat 2A. A window, 3 hours, a book over his eyes, and home. He had no idea what was waiting at the front of that plane. He scanned his pass. The reader beeped green. The gate agent barely glanced up from her screen. Owen stepped onto the jet bridge, into the cool metal tunnel that smelled of jet fuel and recycled air, his footsteps echoing off the walls. For one more minute, everything was fine. The cabin opened up ahead of him, warm and bright. A flight attendant with a kind smile and a name tag reading, Grace nodded him in. "Welcome aboard, sir." Owen found 2A, slid his bag into the overhead bin, and sank into the leather seat with a quiet sigh of relief. He pulled his mother's card from his jacket and set it on his lap. He'd read it once they were in the air. Outside the window, ground crews waved orange wands under a pale sky. He let his eyes close for a second. Almost home. Almost. He didn't see the gate agent at the front of the cabin watching him, didn't see the frown, didn't hear the first quiet word into a radio. The first sign of trouble had a name tag that read Brett. He was a gate agent, late 20s, with a lanyard and a clipboard he didn't really need. He'd boarded the plane to double-check a manifest, but his eyes kept drifting to seat 2A. Owen felt the stare before he saw it. You always feel it. He opened his eyes and met the young man's gaze. Brett looked away fast, then looked back. Bolder this time, he walked over and leaned across the empty aisle seat. "Sir, there's a question about your boarding pass." Owen sat up. "Okay," Brett said it slowly, like Owen might not know. "This is first class. I just need to verify you're in the right seat. I'm in 2A. That's what my pass says." Owen held it up. "Want to scan it again?" Brett barely looked. "Do you have a second form of ID?" Around them, the cabin kept moving. A man in a wrinkled suit shoved a bag overhead. A woman in pearls sipped champagne in 3C. Nobody asked them for anything. Owen noticed. He always noticed. He handed over his driver's license without a word. Brett studied it far longer than necessary, turning it in the light, glancing from the photo to Owen's face and back. "This says Owen Parker." "That's me, right," Brett said, but he didn't hand it back. He clicked his pen twice, 3 times. That small sound filled the quiet between them. Then, instead of returning the license, he turned and walked toward the galley with the ID still in his hand. Owen's stomach tightened. "Excuse me. That's mine. 1 second, sir." Through the gap in the curtain, Owen watched Brett lift a radio to his mouth. He couldn't hear the words. He didn't need to. He could see the body language, the lowered voice, the quick glance back over the shoulder, the way Brett angled himself away. The cabin had gone a little quieter now. A couple of heads turned. The woman in pearls peered over her glass. Owen sat very still, his hands open and visible on his knees, the way he'd learned to do a long time ago. A minute passed, then the curtain swept aside. The man who came through was older, 50s, thick through the shoulders, with a security supervisor's badge clipped to his belt and a walkie-talkie crackling at his hip. His name tag read Greg Wilson. He didn't ask what was happening. He'd already decided. He looked at Owen the way you look at a stain. "Is there a problem with this passenger?" he said, though he was staring straight at Owen. "Just verifying the seat," Brett mumbled, handing over the license like he was glad to be rid of it. Wilson took it without looking at it. "First class, huh?" He let the word hang. "You fly up here often?" "When I travel, yes." Owen kept his voice even. "Is there an issue? That depends." Wilson finally glanced at the ID, a half second, then slid it into his own shirt pocket. "Tell me your seat number." "It's 2A. It's on the pass in your agent's hand and on the license in your pocket. I asked you." Wilson stepped closer, blocking the aisle, his belt buckle level with Owen's face. "Don't get smart. Just answer the question." 2A, Owen said quietly. "See." Wilson smiled without warmth. "That wasn't hard." He spoke slowly now, the way you'd talk to a child or a dog. "You understand me okay, Chief? You following along?" A few rows back, someone snickered. Owen felt the old heat crawl up his neck. He breathed through it. "I understand you fine." "Good, because something about you isn't sitting right with me." Wilson tapped his own temple. 20 years doing this job, I get a feeling about people. And I'm getting a real strong feeling about you right now. "I'm reading a book and waiting for my flight," Owen said. "That's all I've done. That's all you've done so far." Wilson leaned on the seat back. "How did a guy like you afford a seat like this anyway? Points? Somebody else's card?" The cabin was silent now. Owen heard his own pulse. He heard the woman in pearls whisper to her husband. He heard Brett shift his weight, suddenly unsure of the thing he'd started. "I paid for it," Owen said. "Same as everyone up here." "Sure you did." Wilson straightened up and keyed his radio. "Yeah, it's Wilson. I'm going to need a second unit at gate B14. Got an uncooperative individual on board." "Uncooperative." Owen hadn't raised his voice once. He hadn't moved from his seat. He looked down at the face-down card on his lap, at his own steady hands. and understood exactly where this was going, because he'd been here before, in 100 smaller rooms his whole life. He just never thought it would happen on one of his own planes. Wilson clipped the radio back to his belt and folded his arms. "While we wait, let's clear something up. You got proof you paid for this seat?" Owen blinked. "The boarding pass is the proof. You're holding the ID it's booked under. Anybody can print a pass." Wilson nodded at Owen's jacket. "I mean real proof. Pull up your bank. Show me the charge. Show me the card you supposedly used." The request hung in the air. So absurd it took Owen a second to be sure he'd heard it. Across the aisle, the man in the wrinkled suit stared at his phone, careful not to look. Nobody was asking him to open his banking app. Nobody ever would. Owen's jaw flexed. For a moment, the refusal sat right there on his tongue, every reason this was wrong, every right he was choosing not to throw. Then he thought of the radio, the second unit on its way, the 40 people watching. He thought about getting home. So he took out his phone, he opened the app, he scrolled to the charge, the airline's own name, his own card, the exact fare, and turned the screen toward Wilson. There, paid in full 3 days ago. Wilson glanced at it for half a heartbeat. Could be anybody's account. It has my name on it. Names are easy. He'd already moved the goalposts. The proof didn't count because the proof had never been the point. Owen lowered the phone slowly and understood that too. That was when the woman in pearls spoke up. Loud enough to carry, some of us actually paid to sit up here. A small, satisfied laugh. A man beside her chuckled into his drink. Heat flooded Owen's face, not anger exactly. Something older and heavier. The specific weight of being made small in front of strangers who had already decided you were the problem. "I paid too," Owen said, and his voice was quiet. "Hey," Wilson's hand came up. "Watch the tone. Lower your voice. I'm not raising it. You're being aggressive." Wilson looked around the cabin, performing for them now. "I've got an agitated passenger refusing to comply. You all are my witnesses." Owen went very still. He hadn't moved. He hadn't shouted. He'd shown a license, a pass, a bank charge, and answered every question. And somehow he was the one being painted as a threat. He knew this trick. He'd watched it played on men who looked like him on the evening news. Stay calm and you're suspiciously calm. Speak up and you're aggressive. There was no right way to be black in that seat. There never was. Down the aisle Grace appeared, 2 glasses of water still in her hands. She set them down. "Excuse me, is everything all right here? This gentleman hasn't caused any trouble. I've been right here the whole time." "Stay out of it," Wilson said, not even turning. "This is a security matter, but he hasn't done anything." Grace pressed her ground. "He's just been sitting." I said, "Stay out of it." His tone snapped like a door slamming. Grace's mouth closed. She caught Owen's eye, and in her face was something he was grateful for and sick of needing. An apology she had no power to make good on. The cabin door thudded. 2 more security officers came down the jet bridge and into first class, hands resting easy on their belts, filling the narrow space with the squeak of boots and the static of radios. Wilson's shoulders squared. He had his audience and now he had his backup. He turned to Owen with the calm certainty of a man who had never once been wrong in his own mind. "All right, you're done here. Get up, you're getting off this aircraft." Owen didn't move. He looked up at the 3 of them, at the Punfans already rising over seat backs, at his mother's card, face down on his knee. "On what grounds?" Wilson smiled. "On the grounds that I said so." Owen held his gaze. "I asked a question. What grounds?" Wilson didn't answer. He reached up, popped the overhead bin, and pulled down Owen's carry-on like it was already evidence. "Hey." Owen stood halfway. "You can't search that. I don't consent to that." "Sit down." Wilson dropped the bag onto the empty aisle seat and unzipped it in one hard pull. "On this aircraft, I don't need your permission." That wasn't true. Some part of Wilson probably knew it. But knowing and caring are different things, and the cabin was full of people who weren't going to stop him. He dug through Owen's belongings in front of everyone. A folded shirt, a phone charger, a bottle of his mother's blood pressure pills he'd promised to refill. Wilson held each item up a beat too long, turning it in the light, narrating silently with his eyes. Then his fingers closed on something at the bottom. A laminated card on a lanyard. Owen's executive credential, his photo. The word director in clean capital letters. Owen's heart lifted, just slightly. "That's my company ID. Look at it." Wilson glanced at it. He saw the logo. He saw the title. He saw the photo that matched the face right in front of him, and he tossed it back in the bag. "Fake," he said, "or stolen. People like you don't run anything." The cruelty of it was almost clean. The proof had been in his hand, the literal answer to the question he kept asking, and he'd thrown it away because the answer didn't fit the story he'd already written. Wilson kept digging. He unfolded the worn paperback and shook it by the spine, as if a book might rain down secrets. He unzipped the inner pocket and pulled out a strip of old boarding passes Owen kept out of habit. "Lot of flying for a guy who can't prove he paid," he said to no one and everyone. "Every one of those is in my name. We'll see what your name really is." Wilson didn't even look up. A businessman 2 rows back leaned into the aisle. "Can we hurry this up? Some of us have connections." He said it like Owen was a clog in a drain, not a man being torn apart in public. Wilson nodded at him, apologetic, colleague to colleague. "Almost done, sir. Appreciate your patience." That was the thing that stayed with the people filming later. How polite Wilson was to everyone except the man he was destroying. He looked back at the officers. "Cuff him if he won't move." Then, into his radio, flat and official. "Be advised the individual is refusing lawful instruction. We're removing him now." The individual, not the passenger, not Mr. Papaka. Owen had his name on 3 documents in that man's possession, and Wilson had erased everyone. One of the officers smirked at the other. "First class," he muttered. They shared a small laugh. The kind men share over a thing they've decided is beneath them. Metal flashed. An officer unclipped a pair of handcuffs from his belt, and the ratchet sound, that quick, ugly zip of the teeth, cut through the cabin. Owen felt the cold steel close around one wrist, then the other. Tight enough to pinch. He had committed no crime. He had shown 3 forms of proof, and he was being cuffed in a first-class seat for the offense of sitting in it. "Stand up," Wilson said. "Hands where we can see them." Owen looked at the 3 of them. He could feel the trap in his own body. Fight, and the video shows a struggling black man. Freeze, and they drag him anyway. There was no version of this where his stillness saved him. So he made a choice. He set his mother's card gently on the seat. He raised both hands, slow and open, and he spoke loud enough for every phone to hear. "I'm not resisting. I want everyone recording this. I am not resisting." "Smart," Wilson said, and grabbed his arm. They pulled him up out of 2A. Owen kept his hands open, his body loose, refusing to give them the fight they wanted. It didn't matter. Wilson wrenched one arm behind his back, hard enough that a sound escaped Owen's teeth, and then they were moving him up the aisle. His shoulder cracked into a seat back. A shoe slipped off his foot and stayed behind. His carry-on tipped from the seat and spilled across the carpet. The shirt, the pills, his mother's birthday card, landing open in the aisle just as a boot came down and ground a dirty print across her handwriting. Owen saw it happen. Something in his chest went tight and white. Down the rows, the cabin had become a wall of raised phones, little black rectangles blinking with the light of 100 recording eyes. An older man shook his head, not at the officers, but at Owen. Tutting like Owen was the disgrace being carried past him. A toddler asked in the bright, clear voice of a child, "Who doesn't know what you're not supposed to say? Mummy, why are they hurting that man?" No one answered her. Grace followed them up the aisle, almost crying. "He did nothing. Stop it, please. He did nothing wrong." Wilson threw a hand back without looking. "One more word and you're off this crew." She froze in the galley, watching, helpless. They hauled Owen through the cabin door and out onto the jet bridge, the long grey tunnel swallowing the sound. The walls smelled of fuel and hot metal. His socked foot dragged on the cold floor. Behind him, 40 feet back, a flight attendant was still saying, "He didn't do anything," and her voice got smaller with every step. They didn't stop in the bridge. They walked him out into the gate area, into the full bright stare of the terminal, and they let everyone look. Then came the part that wasn't loud at all, the part that was almost worse. They sat him down on a hard bench against the glass. His belongings stayed scattered on the plane, the card with the boot print, the spilled pills. He asked for them. Wilson said, "You'll get your stuff when we say so." Then the 3 of them turned away, formed a little wall of backs, and started talking among themselves. Laughing once, low, leaving Owen sitting alone in front of 100 strangers, like something they'd taken out with the trash. The bench was cold through his clothes. The glass behind him radiated the chill of the morning tarmac. People slowed as they passed. A family, a flight crew rolling bags, a teenager who lifted a phone and then thought better of it. Each one looked at Owen, did the quick math of a black man in handcuffs, and filed it under guilty before they ever reached their gate. Owen kept his eyes forward. He thought about his mother's hand on his cheek 2 days ago. He thought about the boot print drying on her card somewhere on that plane. He breathed in for 4 counts and out for 4, the way he had taught himself decades ago in rooms exactly like this one, where the safest thing a man like him could be was perfectly, unbearably still. A janitor mopping nearby caught his eye and held it for a second. The only person in that entire terminal who looked at Owen and saw a person. He gave Owen the smallest nod. Owen nodded back. It was a very small kindness, and in that moment it was almost enough to undo him. The cuffs bit into his wrists every time he shifted. He stopped shifting. He let his hands rest still in his lap and stared at a scuff on the floor, counting tiles, doing anything to keep his face calm while the whole airport decided what he was. Nobody read him a charge. Nobody asked him a real question. He just sat there in one shoe in front of the whole world, made invisible and disposable in the same breath. A gate clock ticked overhead. Somewhere a coffee machine hissed. Owen stared at the floor, jaw set, and did the one thing they couldn't take from him. He stayed calm. He stayed exactly deliberately calm, because Owen Parker had not told them who he was. Not yet. He'd given them every chance to do the right thing. The pass, the ID, the company card with director printed across it, the bank charge on the screen. He'd let them choose again and again, and they had chosen wrong every single time. Now he was done asking. Slowly he reached into his hoodie pocket, took out his phone and pressed a number he knew by heart. And on the other end, a voice that ran the entire operation answered on the second ring. Skyline Operations, this is Janet. Owen turned slightly away from the officers and spoke low. Janet. It's Owen. And then her voice changed completely, sharpened, straightened, the voice of someone snapping to attention. Mr. Parker, is everything all right? You sound, I'm at gate B14, I'm in handcuffs. He said it plainly, no drama. Your security team pulled me off flight 226 and cuffed me in front of the cabin. I'd like you to come down here. Please. The line went dead quiet. Then, I'm leaving my desk this second. Don't move. Don't say another word to them. He hung up. Wilson had noticed the call. He stepped over, annoyed. Who do you think you're phoning? Your lawyer won't get here before your flight's long gone. Not my lawyer. Yeah? Wilson crossed his arms. Who then? Calm as still water. The person who runs this airline. Wilson barked a laugh. He leaned toward the other officers. You hear that? He runs the airline. He leaned down close to Owen, close enough that Owen could smell the coffee on his breath. Let me tell you how this goes, pal. You're going to sit here quiet, and then you're going to be charged with trespassing and disturbance, and then a door banged open across the concourse. A woman in a charcoal suit was crossing the gate area, fast, heels striking tile like gunshots. 2 operations staff scrambling to keep up. Her ID badge swung from her neck. Her face was white. She didn't look at Wilson. She went straight to Owen, dropped to a crouch in front of the bench, and her voice cracked with something close to horror. Mr. Parker, oh my God. Her eyes went to the handcuffs and stayed there. Who did this? Who put these on you? The entire gate area seemed to hold its breath. Wilson's smirk wobbled. Ma'am, this is a security matter. You need to step back. The woman stood, and now her voice carried to every corner of the gate. Do you know who this is? Wilson, his certainty cracking. A non-compliant passenger. This is Owen Parker. She let the name land. Founder, chairman, chief executive of Skyline Airways. He owns this airline. He owns that aircraft you just dragged him off of.
He signs your paychecks.
And mine. The silence that followed had a texture to it. You could feel it move through the crowd, phone by phone, face by face. Brett, standing off to the side, made a small wounded sound and put a hand over his mouth. The woman in pearls who'd said some of us actually paid set down her glass. Her face had gone pale. The businessman who'd wanted everyone to hurry up suddenly found his shoes very interesting. The toddler's mother pulled her daughter close, watching the man in handcuffs become the most powerful person in the building. The blood drained from Wilson's face in stages. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. He looked at the handcuffs. Then at the company ID still sitting in the spilled bag. A crew member had just carried off the plane. the one stamped director that he'd called fake 10 minutes ago. A passenger near the front lowered her phone long enough to whisper, "That's the owner." They cuffed the owner. The sentence moved through the crowd like a current. Repeated until it reached the back of the gate. Wilson heard it from every direction. He reached for the wall to steady himself. "Take them off," Janet said to the officer holding the keys. Her voice was iron. "Take them off him right now," they fumbled. The cuffs clicked open. Owen rolled his wrists slowly, red lines pressed into the skin. He stood to his full height for the first time since it began. He didn't shout, he didn't gloat. That wasn't the kind of power he carried. He picked up his single shoe, slid it on, and looked Wilson dead in the eye. "You wanted me to prove I could afford the seat." Owen's voice never rose. "I own the plane." Wilson's lips moved. "Mr. Parker, I had no way of knowing. I never raised it. It's on 40 phones. You'll see." "Sir, please. I was just following. You called me the individual." Owen took the company ID from the crew member's hands and held it up between them, the word director catching the light. "My name is Owen Parker. It's painted on the side of the plane you threw me off of." Then he turned to Janet, and his voice shifted. Still calm, but carrying the quiet weight of a man giving an order he means. "Get me the operations director on the line. Every Crestline aircraft holds at the gate. Nothing pushes back. Not one plane leaves the ground until I know how this happened and who let it." Janet blinked. "Sir, that's the entire fleet, 180 aircraft. I know exactly how many planes I own. Ground all of them." The word went out in under a minute. Janet relayed the order, and across the country, screens at the operations center flipped from green to red, gate by gate, airport by airport. Pushback halted, engines spun down. 180 aircraft sat frozen on the tarmac from coast to coast, all because of what 3 people did at gate B14. The hum of the terminal seemed to drop an octave. You could feel something enormous turning, slow and unstoppable, behind the glass. Wilson stood in the middle of it, sweating now. The swagger was gone. What was left was a man doing the math on his own life, Mr. Parker. His voice had changed completely. "I want to apologize. I was just following procedure. We get briefings, you understand, about who to watch for. And briefings about who to watch for," Owen repeated flatly. "And I fit the briefing." "That's not. I didn't mean." Wilson's hands fluttered uselessly. "I had no way of knowing who you were. That's exactly the problem." Owen's voice stayed level, but it cut. "You should treat people decently when you don't know who they are. That's the whole point. A man doesn't have to own the plane to deserve to sit on it in peace." Wilson had no answer. His mouth worked, but the excuses had run dry. A few feet away, Brett was falling apart. The young agent's eyes were wet, his clipboard hanging forgotten at his side. "Mr. Parker, I'm so sorry." His voice broke. "I started this. I flagged you. I don't even know why. Yes, you do," Owen said. Not cruelly. Just true. Brett's face crumpled. "He didn't look like he belonged up front," he whispered. The moment the words left his mouth, he heard them, really heard them, and he went grey. He had just said the whole thing out loud. On camera, in a terminal full of phones. Owen looked at him for a long moment. There was no triumph in it, only a deep, bone-level tiredness. By now, airport police had arrived. Real officers, summoned by the commotion and the calls already lighting up dispatch. They reviewed the cuff marks on Owen's wrists. They took in the scattered belongings, the crushed birthday card a flight attendant had rescued and carried out. The wall of passengers eager to show what they'd filmed. Owen turned to Janet. His orders came clean and certain. "These 3 are relieved of duty, effective now. Wilson, both officers' badges and access cards today." He nodded toward Brett. "Him too. But I want it on record that he's the only one who told the truth about why." Wilson's head snapped up. "You can't just... I have 20 years here. I have rights. I have a union. You'll have every process you're owed, which is more than you gave me." A police officer stepped in close to Wilson, lowering his voice, asking him to come answer some questions about an unlawful detention and a search no one had consented to. For the first time, Wilson was the one being walked somewhere he didn't want to go. He looked back over his shoulder as they led him away. The last of his certainty was gone. Just a man suddenly small, being led across a terminal while strangers filmed. Owen didn't watch him go. He had already crouched down by the bench where Grace had set the rescued items in a careful little pile. He picked up his mother's birthday card. The boot print had smeared the ink, but her handwriting was still there underneath. "Happy travels, my boy. Call me when you land." His thumb moved slowly over the dirt. For 1 second, the calm slipped, and 40 phones caught the truth of it. Not a CEO. Not a man who had just frozen a fleet. Just a son holding a ruined card from his mother. Then he straightened, slid it carefully into his jacket, and got back to work. Within the hour, the story was already escaping the airport. A clip titled "Security Drags Black CEO Off His Own Plane" hit a few thousand views, then a few 100,000. By the time Owen's car pulled away from the curb, his own face was climbing every feed in the country. By morning, the clip was everywhere. It had a name now, the B-14 video. 40 different angles stitched together by strangers online. You could watch Wilson rip the pass in half. You could hear, crisp and undeniable, "People like you belong in the gutter." You could see a man in handcuffs saying over and over, "I'm not resisting," while a child's voice asked why they were hurting him. 30 million views in 2 days, then 60, a week-long trending hashtag. But the video was only the beginning, because the moment Crestline's own legal team pulled the gate footage, they found something that turned a viral clip into a federal case. Wilson had a history. An internal audit ordered personally by Owen opened the files that old management had quietly buried. 9 prior complaints against Greg Wilson over 6 years. 9. Almost all from passengers of color, each one marked, unsubstantiated, and shredded into the system, because the people who could have stopped him had decided it was cheaper to look away. That, Owen told his board, is the real scandal. One man can be cruel. It takes an institution to protect him. The story stopped being about a bad day. It became about a pattern, and patterns are what prosecutors love, the pressure built by the hour. Major outlets ran the footage on the evening news. Civil rights groups held press conferences on the airport steps. Sponsors and politicians who had never met Owen lined up to condemn what they'd seen, because by then there was no other safe place to stand. The woman in pearls from seat 3C found herself identified online and issued a trembling public apology. The businessman who'd wanted everyone to hurry up deleted his accounts. Within a week, the U.S. Attorney's Office opened a civil rights investigation. The lead prosecutor was a sharp, unhurried woman named Laura Davis, who had built a career on cases exactly like this one. She watched the B-14 video in her office, set down her pen, and reportedly said only one word, "Finally." Then she opened a file and got to work. The charges, when they came, were heavy. Unlawful detention, warrantless search. And the one that made headlines, a federal civil rights violation, depriving a person of their rights under color of authority. Wilson's lawyer tried the only defense he had. My client was following airline protocol. He believed he was doing his job. Davis was ready for that. In court, she played the footage on a large screen, freezing it at the moment Wilson held Owen's executive ID, the laminated card stamped director, the matching photo, the company logo, and tossed it back into the bag. "This is not a man who lacked information," she told the jury, her voice quiet and certain. He held the proof in his hand. He read the title. He saw the face, and he called it fake because the truth did not match the story he had already decided was true. That is not a mistake. That is a choice. He made it 9 times before, who to 9 other people who didn't happen to own the plane. The courtroom was silent. The boot print on the birthday card sat in an evidence bag on the table. Brett Anderson testified for the prosecution. He didn't try to save himself. He described the briefings, the nudges, the unspoken understanding of who got extra scrutiny and who walked through. His honesty cost him his career, but helped break the case open. "I went along with it," he told the court, his voice shaking. "That's the part I have to live with. Nobody made me, I just did." Former passengers came forward, the 9 from the buried complaints, telling stories that suddenly sounded a lot less unsubstantiated with 30 million witnesses watching. Inside Crestline, the reckoning went deeper than 3 badges. The audit named the managers who had stamped those 9 complaints as unsubstantiated, and they were gone too. Owen brought in outside investigators and gave them a mandate that made the lawyers nervous. Turn over every rock, even the ones under my own name. "I built this company," he told a packed all-hands meeting, his voice steady. "Which means whatever rotted inside it grew on my watch. I don't get to be shocked, I get to fix it." The room went silent. Then slowly, people began to applaud, not the easy kind, but the kind that sounds like relief. The verdict came down on a grey afternoon, guilty on all counts. The judge did not mince words at sentencing. He called Wilson's conduct a betrayal of public trust dressed up as procedure, and noted that the pattern, not the single act, was what demanded a real consequence. Greg Wilson was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison, stripped of his security certification for life, and ordered to pay restitution. Legal scholars called it a landmark. One of the rare times profiling dressed as procedure was named for exactly what it was, in open court with a conviction attached. Outside the prison transport that day, a small crowd had gathered. They weren't there for Wilson. They were there holding printed stills from the B-14 video, the torn pass, the cuffs, the card under the boot, silent, just making sure it was witnessed all the way to the end. The two officers who'd helped haul Owen off the plane took plea deals, loss of their licenses, probation, a public record of what they'd done. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. Owen stepped to the microphones, calm as ever, and kept it short. This was never really about me. He paused. I had a phone number, that ended it. Most people in that seat don't. They get the handcuffs, the humiliation, the assumption, and no one ever comes running across the concourse to say their name. The 9 people before me didn't. That's who this verdict is for. He paused again, and then said the line that ran on every channel that night. A seat in first class shouldn't be the thing that earns you respect. Being a human being should be enough. But Owen Parker wasn't finished. A conviction punished one man. He wanted to make sure the next black traveler in seat 2A never needed a phone number at all. And what he did next would outlast every headline. 3 months later, the planes looked the same. Everything else had changed. Owen lifted the grounding only after he had something real to show for it. He didn't want a press release. He wanted a wall the next traveler could lean on. Walk into any Crestline terminal now and you'll see it by the gate. A passenger bill of rights, printed plain and large enough to read from a line. You will not be searched without cause. You will not be removed without a written reason. You may record. You may ask why. The card hangs where the boarding signs hang, ordinary as a departure time, which is exactly the point. Every security officer and gate agent in the company went through new training. Not a video they clicked past, real sessions on bias, de-escalation, and the simple radical idea that a calm question is not a threat. A new complaint goes to an independent ombudsman now, someone with no reason to bury it. The word unsubstantiated no longer makes problems disappear. Grace Taylor never went back to the galley. Owen promoted her to help lead the new training program, because the woman who'd said he did nothing wrong when it cost her something was exactly who he wanted teaching it. She tells every class the same thing. I was the only crew member who spoke up. There should have been 10 of us. Be the 10. Brett Anderson lost his job and didn't fight it. But months later, he wrote Owen a long letter, not asking for anything, just owning what he'd done and what he'd learned. Owen wrote back, "People can't undo a thing like that, but they can decide who to be after it. The slow work of becoming someone better is still work worth doing." And the card, his mother's card, with a boot print that never fully cleaned off, Owen had it framed. It hangs in his office now, next to the awards and the headlines, the smallest thing on the wall, the one he looks at most. He used the settlement money for none of himself. He seeded a fund with it. Legal aid and travel equity scholarships named for the date everything happened, so that the next person pulled aside without cause has a number to call, the way he did. The 9 names from the buried complaints were the first recipients. He found every one of them. A few weeks after the reforms went live, Owen flew Crestline again, same route, seat 2A. This time a young gate agent greeted every passenger with the same easy warmth, the family, the businessman, the teenager, the quiet man in the hoodie near the back. No one singled out, no one made to prove they belonged. Owen watched it happen from his window seat. And for the first time in a long time, he let his shoulders drop. He pulled out his mother's card, the real one he kept traveling with, and finally read it in the air, the way she'd told him to. The story you just heard is fiction. Owen Parker isn't real, but the handcuffs, the proof you paid, the proof held up and called fake, the assumption that arrives before a single word, those are stitched together from real cases, real people, Real days that didn't end with a phone call to save them. Most of those stories never trend, most never get a verdict. They just get lived through, quietly and carried. So the question this leaves isn't whether this still happens. It does. The question is what gets done the next time it happens in front of someone who isn't the one being hurt. Because on that plane, 40 people had phones. Only one flight attendant had a voice. The difference between a tragedy and a turning point is often just whether somebody nearby decides not to look away. So here's the real question, and drop your honest answer in the comments. If you'd been sitting in row 3 that morning, watching it happen, would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have been the one to stand up? Tell the truth. Then ask yourself what you'll do the next time it isn't a story on a screen. If this one moved you, share it with someone who needs to see it. Hit like so it reaches further, and subscribe because the next person they try this on might not own the plane, but they'll still deserve every bit of the respect Owen had to fight for.